Hey there, welcome to Up Until Now with Kristen Hallinan, where we are healing from yesterday's hurts, allowing God to redeem our story, and finding hope for our family's future. Up until now, you may have been suffering from old wounds, trying to live in your own strength, or playing it too small. But around here, we know that who you were, or even the person you are today, is not a permanent seal on who you are becoming. In Jesus, the best is always yet to come. Welcome back to another episode of Up Until Now, where we are all about having a growth mindset, taking what we knew yesterday and improving upon it, and knowing what was true about us yesterday does not have to be true anymore. And that's why I am so excited to welcome our guest, Alex Kuykendall, to the show. We are talking about stopping the constant yearning for a life that we were wishing we had and accepting and celebrating the life that we actually have. Alex is the author of several books, including Seeking Out Goodness, Finding the True and Beautiful All Around You. She is a co-founder of the Open Door Sisterhood, a community of women working to be world changers for good right where they are, and runs an annual retreat under the same name. She co-hosts the Our Time to Rise podcasts and serves as a director of national network and new development for Project 127, a ministry connecting and supporting families and churches as they engage with their local foster care systems. She lives in the shadows of downtown Denver with her husband, Derek, and their 4 daughters. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I am so thrilled to have you here because when I think about you, I think about somebody who is really intentional with your family and your community and the people around you. Will you tell us a little bit more about you and your family?
Sure. So I heard you say, because I think I told you in my bio, that our 4 daughters live with us, but really our oldest daughter is away at college. So
Oh,
we do have 4 girls ages 12 to 21 in that age range, and we're about to have another one join her sister at the University of Colorado. So yeah, we're in the halfway mark of launching our kids this May when our second graduates. My husband runs a ministry here in Denver that does transitional housing for people coming out of homelessness, usually connected in one or more ways to addiction, which usually often has some mental health components to it. And then domestic violence is also a component to many of the, and that's just been kind of our family support mission for him. I mean, it's his job, it's not my job, but part of my job is to support him.
mhm.
And then about 3 years ago, I joined the staff of Project 127, which connects churches to foster care here in Colorado. And part of what I do is support leaders around the country that are doing the same thing. So I run a cohort of executive directors who run similar organizations around the country, connecting their local churches to their local foster care system. So we live a lot in hearing hard stories
Yeah.
of seeing how God is working in real, tangible ways in people's lives, how faith can be gritty, and how faith gives people the opportunity to live out in perseverance. Because when things are not easy or pretty or comfortable or convenient, your
Mhm.
faith is what drives you forward and allows you to stay because there's a bigger reason, and redemption is always a possibility. And so there's hope that we hold on behalf of people while standing in the reality of what it means to live in addiction or what it
Yeah.
means to have patterns of trauma in your family history and how that's playing out in your own life. And so it's that both and the here and the not yet. And it's a real honor and
Mhm.
privilege to be able to hear people's stories like we do.
I love how mission minded y'all are outside of the home and then inside of the home too. I think you just do such a beautiful job of taking that inside of the home and loving your people really well. I remember more than 10 years ago now, back in 2013, when you came out with your very first book, The Artist's Daughter.
Mhm.
I read that book and it was the first time that I had read someone's like, personal account of an absent father. And I just felt really known. And it was a healing book for me to read someone else's
Mm,
experience of that. And you talk about how the experience of becoming a mom caused you to dive into your own story
mhm.
and really unpack a lot of that. Um, can you tell us about what you were learning in that season?
Yeah. Sometimes life just kind of uh, gives you what it gives you, and
Yeah.
you aren't maybe looking for it. And when I had my first daughter, so she's 21, that was 21 years ago, I was 28 years old. I'd been married for a little under 5 years. And I all of a sudden was faced with this overwhelming love for this baby ever experienced before. And I think any parent can understand that. And what I was learning is that this is how parents feel about their
Yeah.
kids. And then that opened up a wound that felt especially painful. Like, wait,
Mhm.
if this is how parents naturally feel, where was my dad? And what did keep him away?
Mhm.
And that was 21 years ago. So I have grown a lot and I have learned a lot as I've lived more adult life. I've
Mhm.
had more compassion for him and his experience in those years, though I didn't really get a chance to talk to him about it because I mentioned in the book that he passed away when my fourth daughter was born, and it was really before I kind of reconciled all those feelings. It was while I was writing the book.
Mhm.
And so I really learned that we have choice. I knew that, but also that people are going to make choices that we don't understand.
Yeah.
And I couldn't, part of the pain was I just could not relate to loving a child this much and not chasing her to the ends of the earth.
Yes.
That's what I wanted, and he did not do that. And
Mhm.
that's just the reality. And I will probably never fully understand. I maybe understand a little more now than I did 20 years ago, but I probably won't ever fully understand because I am not wired that way. I
Yeah,
will I will go after my children always and forever. So,
for sure.
anyway, that I think that was one big thing is that I'm never gonna fully understand other people's motives,
Mhm.
decisions, thought processes, and that's part of the human experience is that we aren't God and we aren't going to understand other people the way that God does.
Yeah, I think that's just a really good truth to lay out there that like sometimes we will never understand and we're never going to be able to reconcile it. So, what do you think healing looks like in those circumstances where you're like, I'm never going to agree with that, or
Mm.
I'm never going to see why they did that? How can we still heal in light of that?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. And this really is where I feel like faith is real for people
Mhm.
because as I hear other people's stories of abuse and neglect and real trauma in their lives that they'll never understand,
Mm.
to know that God was there in
Yeah.
all of it. And that can be hard for
Mhm.
people. But this practice of where were you, God, in that moment?
Mhm.
And that this is the mystery of faith that God is all knowing and all powerful. And at the same time, we live in a world that is not as it should be. And
Yeah.
He allows things to happen. He
Mhm.
allows good things or bad things to happen to people who don't deserve such terrible things. To recognize that He was there, that we were not alone in that pain. We are not alone in
Mhm.
the pain now. And that can sound really heartless to people. I recognize that. And yet that's the mystery of
Mhm.
not being able to understand God. So in the healing, to know that He was there, I do think there are some real practical best practices, things that people can do in therapy that
Yeah.
can take them back to those places and kind of reframe.
Mhm.
Um, I have not done that, but I think a lot of people have healed that way. So I want to
Yeah.
say that clinical work is good work.
Mhm.
Um, but for me, I simply learned more of God. I had a marriage and half a marriage felt safe to me. So that was
Mhm.
part of it too, is that my husband was a big support to me and a few close friends. But to recognize that in my story as an adult, I have agency. God gives us free will, and
Mm.
I can choose a different path, and
Yeah.
I can be a different kind of parent, and
Mhm.
I can be intentional about the life that we live.
Yeah.
I can't control everything. I can't control the people in my home, but I can be intentional about my decisions. And that's, again, a little bit freeing because then it means I am the person I'm responsible for. And
Yep.
as a parent, you're responsible for taking care of your children, but you're not in the end responsible for their life decisions.
Yeah.
They get to grow into that agency and that free will as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answered your
No,
question, but I
that's
think
yeah.
recognizing too that we can make a different story for ourselves is healing because it reminds us that God doesn't say that what happened to us is the end of our story or the definition of who we are.
Mm.
What happened to us does shape us, and he determines our value, and we get to decide what our next is.
I love holding that and like this was true and I'm going to name it.
Mhm.
And it doesn't have to be true of me going forward. It's not a permanent seal on who I am. I know before I did a lot of trauma work in therapy, I did a lot of story work to just unfold like, what was my story? And, trauma has such a good way of like making us kind of have these broken memories and not really understanding our story as a whole. And it was when I just really like dug into the details and laid it out that I started to see God showing up over and over in a way I couldn't have told you about before without like really digging into that pain.
Mm,
And so I like how you talk about like seeing how God was there, even when you weren't aware of it, or maybe you weren't even having a close relationship with him. Like he was still there. And my therapist says, Kristen, stories that began the way yours did don't usually end the way yours did. And just like
mm,
seeing the grace of God in
mm,
that, I think is really powerful.
mhm,
Yeah. Okay, so after you wrote The Artist's Daughter, you wrote Loving My Actual Life, an
mhm,
experiment in relishing what's right in front of me, and
mm,
then Loving My Actual Neighbor. What
mhm.
made you write these books next?
Well, Loving My Actual Life, I came up with the idea when I was on staff with MOPS International still,
Okay.
and I was listening to moms about just kind of their everyday lives, and social media was starting to have a force of its own that it hadn't had up to that point. I remember I was in MOPS when I learned about Facebook for the first time. I'm that old. And I mean, it was 20 years ago, right?
Yeah.
But by the time I got to the point where I was writing Loving My Actual Life, there was this ability to see into other people's lives in a way we hadn't had before.
Mm,
So that was part of the cultural milieu that was changing.
mhm.
But also, I think just human nature. We
Yeah.
tend to not be satisfied. We tend
Yep.
to want more. I still struggle with it.
Mhm.
And I wanted to remember that this phase of life is a good one.
Mm.
And I knew because so many women had told me before, you will miss this. And even
Yeah.
though in the middle of it, I thought, I really won't miss some of this. I didn't want to spend my children's young years wishing those years away.
Yeah.
And I also knew, okay, well, I'm giving them a lot of me. So
Mhm.
how am I going to take care of myself so that I can
Mm.
enjoy these years a little more? So
Yeah.
those were kind of all of the motivators that
Mhm.
brought the book forward.
That's really good. Yeah, it's a great
Mhm.
point about having to still figure out who you are and love that about yourself. So, because children will grow and they'll change and their seasons change, and then as you're experiencing right now, they leave.
Mhm.
And yeah, we got to be consistent about that. It's good. In the books, you get super practical, which I love,
Mhm.
because it's like these are really great ideas, but how do we actually do this?
Mhm.
When you talk about loving the people around you well, you give suggestions like making interactions with strangers a little bit more meaningful, or giving others your undivided attention than
Mhm.
when they're speaking to you. You say it's not about having time, it's about making time with the right attitude. Tell us
Mhm.
more about how we can do that.
Mhm. I know. I look at some people and I think, gosh, how do they get so much done? And then
Mhm.
how are they so present with people? And I
Mhm.
do want to recognize that we have different capacities, like just
Yep.
our personalities, our energy levels, our life circumstances. We're going to have different capacities to be able to do different things. So, again, our natural bent is to compare ourselves to other people. So, I don't want people to feel like they need to compare themselves to me.
Mhm.
But I do understand that feeling of looking at somebody else and thinking, wow, how does she do that?
Mhm.
At the same time, we can recognize God gives us all the same amount of time in a day. He
Yep.
gives us all 24 hours, and we get to decide. Again, this gets back to our agency. We get to decide to some degree how we're going to spend it. I mean, if we have children, we have to care for them. Or now I'm moving into the caring for parents stage of life. There are
Mhm.
some responsibilities that we have that we do need to take care of.
Mhm.
But the how we have some decision around usually.
Mhm.
So I really want to use my time well
Mhm.
and to recognize that I have some natural time suckers in my life,
Mm.
and
Mhm.
my phone, big one, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
you sit down and 20 minutes later, you think, "What did I just do? Nothing. I didn't do
Shoot.
anything." Yeah,
Yeah.
and I could have been using that doing something else. So just being really intentional about how we use our time, and then also to not be so overscheduled that we don't
Mm.
have time to be interrupted by
Yeah.
someone. So I still have kids at home. I'm going to be interrupted quite often.
Mhm.
But I remember when my kids were really young and we were running from one activity to the next, to the next, to the next after school, I did not have enough time to stop and just see how somebody was, another
Mhm.
mom on the playground. Like, I'm sorry, I don't have time to talk to you. That
Yeah.
was not how I wanted to live. And
Mhm.
so also being mindful of the buffers on either side of an event so that
Mhm.
I have realized if I don't feel rushed, even if I end up leaving at the exact same time, my demeanor while I'm there is more relaxed and more present because I am not thinking about, we got to go. Like, as soon as this game is over, we're in basketball season at our house right now. So, as soon as this
Mhm.
game is over, grabbing coats, we're going to the next thing.
Yeah.
But to build it into my schedule that maybe we'll stay for 20 minutes at that game and just talk to
Mhm.
people after. Those kinds of things are helpful for me
Yeah.
in the practical of how do we actually live a more present life.
That is a word for me because we are in the same kind of just run and run and run. And our kids have kind of a similar spread of years. They're 6 to 16 right now,
Mhm.
also have four. And so we feel like that. We're just running and running and tag teaming and like to buffer in a little bit of grace into the schedule. That is super wise. And I'm going to think about how we can do a better job of that. That's really helpful. So do you think, your kid, your girls, as they're in different stages as they grow, how do you make sure you feel like you're having enough time, intentional time with each kiddo with, the very realistic limitations that we have?
Yeah. It's hard, and I try to give myself a lot of grace
Yeah.
because how much time is enough? There's always
Mhm.
could be more.
Yeah.
And so it is about being mindful of how much am I on my phone? Because
Mhm.
if my kids are in the kitchen with me and I'm on my phone, I could be paying attention to them. I could be
Mm.
asking them questions. Now, recognize I am in also a phase of parenting where you ask a child a question and they may not want to talk to you. So that is a very real phase, and to not force it, but to just be with them
Yeah.
and not feeling guilty that we're not having a big, meaningful connection every time we're together. Because there
Smart.
is the element of faithful presence as well. So I work from home, which is nice because then I am available if they need me, but they're often in their rooms. So I try to make the most of moments when we're in the car, when we're having dinner, when we are, just in the kitchen together and asking questions and really trying to put my phone away.
Yeah.
And at the same time, recognizing parenting isn't about this one conversation. It's about the faithful presence for years on end. And I have been faithful and I will continue to be faithful and I'm not going anywhere. So to remind myself of that, because I can go into the, like, did I even talk to anyone today? Did I even have a connection with anyone today? What am I doing? Are my priorities all wrong? My priorities aren't wrong. I choose my jobs based on my family. Like my big picture decisions are all around my children.
Yeah.
So if I have moments where I'm like, you know what, guys, I actually have to get this work done. It's okay. It's okay because big picture on the macro, I have made decisions that make my flexible schedule a priority.
It's freeing for me to hear you say that they're in their rooms or they're not really wanting to answer the question, because I feel like that is our life. And I can get stuck in the cycle of like, am I not being a good mom? Should I force him out of their room and like force him into this conversation? And so to hear that that's just normal and that's happening in all the other houses too, like that's freeing for me to hear. I think a lot of us can get stuck in the disappointment that either our life is not going the way we wanted it to, or our family doesn't look the way we expected it to, or we cannot force the extended family to have relationships that we wish were there. In the book, you said, rather than asking God to bless the plans that I've made, I was seeing God's plan and how I can contribute in my small way. How do you do this with family when all of the things are unfolding like we had made up in our mind years ago, like we could force this family into perfection, and it's not happening that way in real life? How do we come alongside God's plan?
Well, I mean, this is the $1,000,000 question. One, we recognize we live with people and people don't follow our plans. And if we haven't figured that out yet, we haven't really been paying attention to people. So to hold everything loosely and to, again, on the macro level, know that we are pushing things in a certain direction. So let's take patience, for example. We want to cultivate patience in ourselves and in our children. And we also don't have patience sometimes. And so to give ourselves grace to say, okay, I did not do that well. To tell the other people in our home, I did not do that well. I'm going to try again. And then to give other people the opportunity to try again. And to say, on a micro level, we kind of failed. But that's not how we're judging things. We are pushing overall to be a family of patience, where we know that we're going to have bad moments, where we are going to grow. I mean, talk about taking that, what did we do today and how can we do it better tomorrow? So I think having that, but also overall asking God, what are you asking of me in this life? And I have spent too many years of my life searching for God's plan for me, like his one purpose, his one plan. And I think this is part of aging and getting older, because I hear people ahead of me say it more than people behind me as far as age goes. But this idea that God doesn't really have like a specific assignment for me necessarily. He wants me to love him and to love other people. And he gives me the freedom to have it look all kinds of different ways. And that should be freedom inducing.
Yeah.
I think some of us want that single assignment because then it's really clear and it gives a direction. When we are given agency and we have choice, we can feel overwhelmed, especially now because we live in a time of great choice. We live in a culture and a country of great choice. I don't think every woman around the world probably has the same level of choice that you and I have.
Mm-hmm.
But because we live where we do, in the time that we do, I think God is like, it could look lots of ways
Yeah.
because you're a person of many interests. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
like doing a lot of things. So I have written books, but I haven't written one lately. And because I've been doing other things, I
Yeah.
really care about foster care, but I've never been a foster parent. I really care about my homeless neighbors, but I haven't fed them a meal lately. Like there's a lot of parts of me
Yeah.
that I can contribute out into the world of loving God and loving neighbor without it being this single track focus assignment.
That perspective is so good. And I have not thought about it like that in a really long time. I am so guilty of getting caught up in like every little detail, thinking like there is a right and a wrong according to God.
Mhm.
And if
Mm.
I pick wrong, like it's going to be a disaster. And so that is such a freeing point of view. Thank you. When it comes to loving our neighbors and I think our family, everyone, what keeps us from doing it well?
Well, sin,
Mm.
because we think we're God. That's pretty much it. We think we know how other people should live. So we start putting some judgment in there. We think we know people's experiences and we don't know anything about their life story or how it got internalized because two people can live
Yeah.
very similar stories and have it come out in a different way. And
Yeah.
so I think it's our sinful nature that we are very self-focused and
Mhm.
we go to self-preservation, we go to comfort, and that keeps us from putting other people's needs in front of our own,
Mhm.
which that's what Christ did. He put other people's needs in front of his own when he died on the cross.
Mhm.
And our job to live a Christ-like life is essentially to put other people's needs ahead of ours. And I think for those of us that are moms, we
Mhm.
get a little glimpse of that. Like, oh, no, I know what it is to truly be selfless because
Mhm.
I will put my children's needs above my own sometimes. Maybe
Mhm.
not all the time. And it's probably healthy not to do it all the time. But at least some of the time, we know what that's like. But to say, my neighbor who kind of bugs me and their trash smells and they play really loud music. Like, I don't want to put their needs in front of mine. I don't want to put
Mhm.
their comfort in front of mine. I recently matched up two friends. Like I did a friend, what would you call it? Like matchmaking? Like you two
Uh-huh.
should know each other. And
Yes.
so one of them was and there's probably, I'm going to guess like a 30-year age difference between these two women, but
I
they
love it.
remind me of each other in the way they live their lives and in their outlook on life. And the younger one was coming to me and I was like, no, you need to go to Sharon, who's even older than I am. I'm older than you, but she's really older than you because she's older than me. And so Hope, I'll just name them. So
Yeah.
Hope told me that Sharon said, the Bible doesn't talk about boundaries. And we live in a time where, and that felt kind of convicting to me, like, yeah, the Bible talks about laying down our lives for other
Mhm.
people. And there's not a lot of boundaries in there. And we like that language. And I think in order to be healthy enough to care for other people, we need to recognize our parameters
Mhm.
and our limitations as human people. We
Mhm.
need to recognize that Jesus had a close circle of people that he served
Yep.
uh, more heavily than everybody
Mhm.
when he was walking on earth, that he had a few close relationships that he invested in. So to see that modeling, but like there's no verse that talks about thou shall have real strict boundaries. So I think we can glean and say, okay, Jesus had to rest. That's because we're finite bodies that need sleep.
Yeah.
So we'll do that. But as we think about loving other people, I don't want to say like have unhealthy relationships.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I want to kind of parse through what are the messages I have been believing lately about relationships, for example, that are from the world and what are truly based in truth, which I think can be tracked back to scripture. And there is a concept of having some parameters because we're finite people. And yet there is also a concept of laying down our lives for others. And how do we work that out?
It's so good. I have been shifting my view of boundaries from away from more of a wall and towards those personal limitations like you talked about. And like boundaries for the most part, they should be on my own self. Like I am doing what is going to keep me walking in the fruit of the spirit, and I'm going to do what's going to keep me healthy enough, mentally stable enough to love other people well. But I'm not out there putting these boundaries or these walls up on other people because I can't even choose their actions and their choices. And so it's a silly quest. And B, you're right. Like that's not the boundaries, quote unquote, that Jesus modeled. So that's really good. You are a longtime podcast host, and for many years,
yes, we were doing it a long time ago, and I was like, "What's a podcast?" Okay, sure.
You were an OG, yes. Yeah. So it was called the Open Door Sisterhood, and then you recently just transitioned the name this year. Tell us about that.
So in May, we switched our name to Our Time to Rise, and the Open Door Sisterhood. People were like, what, the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, like what is that? We don't know. Open Door, what is that? So we had named a retreat that, and then the podcast kind of came after the retreat, so we just kind of chose the same name, but people didn't really know what it was. But what we were doing was developing an audience, and we realized our audience were women who were in midlife, so kind of mid 40s to maybe 60. And that there's a lot of change that happens during that time, both physically, stage of life, stress. For many women, their careers, it's a time of real growth in their careers, and kids are leaving. So just a lot of things. Marriages have a really hard time in that transition of going to empty nest. And we thought we want to capture that challenge in a way that is also a call to meet the moment, knowing that God is with us in this moment and that it is our time to rise. Like for many of us, we're becoming the adults of the family in that our parents have been living and we still kind of feel like kids, until you're taking care of your parents or your parents pass away. So then all of a sudden you have this new sense and we're becoming the bosses, like at work, the actual bosses. And so how do we meet and rise to these new responsibilities, maybe new opportunities? I don't want it all to be negative, but also new challenges that we've never had to face before. So because for a lot of us, we kind of, once we had babies, we were a little bit on cruise control as far as like, we know what the next 10 years are going to look like, or the next 15 years are going to look like. And then those years come and go, and hopefully we loved them and cherished them. And we can grieve that is ending while at the same time being excited for what is next. Both can be true at the same time.
I love that. In the context of healing, I talk about that in Legacy Changer, about how we are grieving the things that didn't happen for us or that happened that should never happened, and celebrating like all that we're walking into. And so I love that you're focusing on that for that specific group of women. Because you're right, there's so much transition that we've spent so long in survival mode that we haven't even given ourselves 2 moments to think about all those really big changes. So
yeah, because all of a sudden I'm old. I mean, I don't know how it happened. Like I turned 30 and that was fun. I looked really cute when I turned to 30. I turned to 40 and I was still like, oh yeah, 40s are great. And I turned 50 this year and I'm like, 50? What in the world? That is old ladiness.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's like the last decade just kind of happened.
Yeah.
And again, we can celebrate the good things that happened. We can grieve
Mhm.
that is behind us.
Yeah.
And we can be grateful for the years that we have left, God willing, whatever those are.
Yep. Yeah. That's awesome. So, for anybody who's not already following you and listening to your podcast, where can we find you?
Yeah. So, Our Time to Rise is the podcast. And then you can look for my name on Instagram,
Yeah.
on the World Wide Web.
We'll put it in the
Uh,
show notes.
yeah. You
Yeah.
just got to spell my last name right. That's the only challenge.
Yes. We'll spell it right for them.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, they can do that. Thank you so much for being here today and all your wisdom. I feel like I have a lot to mull on that I'm going to start doing a little bit differently after our conversation. So, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.